something. It's a subject of major discussion on Al Jazeera and other networks trying to take a very strong position against Mohammed bin Salman.
Right.
And then also, I don't know if you noticed this when you were on the ground, but there is I would say a fear on the Qatari side that maybe Saudi Arabia might not only it will interfere internally inside Qatar, but then even the possibility of launching a war against Qatar.
Well, it's very interesting that you bring that up, Jamal, because I would say that for the first time, and I've been to Qatar quite a bit. This is the first time that I heard from Qataris real, legitimate concern and anxiety about some sort of military or paramilitary activity or effort of the Saudis against the Qataris. There is a real concern among everyday Qataris that at some point in the future, they have not ruled out the possibility of a military strike of some kind.
It's a big deal because we don't hear about this
no, you won't
anywhere.
You won't hear about this anywhere else, Jamal. That's part of the thing that I'm trying to say. You will not hear about this anywhere in the media here because it's not being covered, and they don't have the kind of media presence, obviously, or people on the ground in Qatar to really hear and talk about what everyday Qataris are worried about. I mean, there's a real concern. Tensions are very, very high right now between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as you know, together with its partners in the UAE, are leveling a absolutely catastrophic and devastating military campaign, in Yemen right now. You have 80,000, Yemeni children right now who are literally starving to death. You have blockades of food, water, and medicine that most people in Yemen do not have access to. You have military attacks. I mean, it's an absolutely catastrophe of what's happening in Yemen right now. And this effort, even publicly, is being supported by President Trump and by Secretary of State Pompeo. The Qataris are saying, what's going on? This is just destabilizing the region even more. Why? I mean, you have Syria that's destabilized. You have Iraq, which is still destabilized. You have, Afghanistan, which is going through its own process. And now you have the United States engaging actively in an effort to destabilize Yemen with the help of Saudi Arabia.
Well, we should also update our listeners that Congress now basically has passed a resolution condemning, our involvement in Yemen, or basically not condemning, but also saying that the United States should not support Saudi Arabia militarily. Of course, I believe it's a little bit too late for that.
It is too late, Jamal.
Because Saudi Arabia has all the weapons and all the ammunition necessary to basically continue bombing Yemen.
Sure.
and continues to do so.
Sure. Don't take this the wrong way. But I don't think the people in the Senate really care about what's happening in Yemen. I don't think the Congress really cares, minus a few people, what's happening in Yemen. This is a political statement, I believe, that they're trying to make that goes against Donald Trump, who, together with Mike Pompeo, who's the Secretary of State, who continues to throw their support for the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, as well as, and they came out this week, as you know, redoubling their support for what Saudi Arabia and the UAE is doing in Yemen. And for the United States to do that, Jamal, for the U.S. President and for the Secretary of State to continue to support this murderous, catastrophic destabilization of Yemen is absolutely, abhorrent. It's just terrible to see that the United States foreign policy is creating death and destruction and destabilization in yet another Arab country. So my question for you, Jamal, is when has a destabilized Arab country been good for the United States? Did destabilizing Iraq have any benefit for the United States? Does destabilization in Syria have any benefit to the United States? Do they really think that this effort that they're engaged in with Yemen right now, which will completely destabilize it, is going to be good?
Well, I mean,
Come on.
let's stop I mean, and this is not in support of Saudi Arabia. Let's stop the charade and the hypocrisy. Because if the U.S. Congress cared about human rights, about the safety of the citizens of the Arab world, they would have passed a similar, or they would have held Israel to the same standards.
Absolutely.
When they talk about, because the whole thing, came about because of the murder of Khashoggi.
Right.
And how many Palestinian journalists were
Have been
murdered by
murdered.
Israel? If we talk about attacks on, or systematic attacks on Palestinian journalists, Israel's name comes first. If we talk about genocide, Israel's name comes first. If we talk about violation of human rights, Israel's name comes first. If we talk about apartheid, if we talk about violations of UN Security Council resolutions, all the roads lead to Tel Aviv.
That's right.
And now for the U.S. Congress to single out Saudi Arabia, and I'm saying Saudi Arabia is not innocent, but the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And the charade, the level of the hypocrisy and the charade is astounding.
Yeah.
To even, listen and see these congressmen and senators standing, like all of a sudden now, they care about Yemen. Some of them didn't know where Yemen is located on a map.
Well,
but now all of a sudden they just come about and start talking about it.
Yeah, I really do not believe. As I said, Jamal, I really do not believe that the Congress I'm not going to say this about everybody in the Congress, in the House and the Senate, but the overwhelming majority, not only do they not know where Yemen is, and not only do they not know the history of Yemen, but I really doubt that they care about the everyday sufferings, devastating suffering that people of Yemen are going through right now. So the double standard is obviously there. But I am quite concerned, excuse me, I am quite concerned, frankly, about the level of anxiety, worry, and fear. I was actually, I have to be careful talking about this, but there are a few Saudis in Qatar right now. And, because they do definitely feel like their life is in danger. They feel, and I think that every Saudi feels this. I think even Qataris feel this.
So you think these Saudis you're referring to are political asylees, or?
They're people who do not feel, well, you can call them what you wish. There are people who do not feel safe going back to Saudi Arabia right now.
Kind of like Jamal Khashoggi, basically.
Exactly. And let's not forget, it wasn't that long ago there was no Qatar and there was no Saudi Arabia. These are colonial abstractions and colonial constructions that came up after World War II and between World War I and World War II. These are colonial constructions based, from the European powers. The ruling family in Qatar, two of the three big royal families in Qatar actually are from, the land that is now Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot of, obviously, tribal and historical overlap there. Having said that, people are fearful about their lives. People are fearful that if they criticize the Crown Prince, if they're critical of the government of Saudi Arabia, that grave bodily harm, that is death, or some sort of physical devastation will happen to them or their families. And that's a fear that everybody feels right now, wherever you are. And I think that's really tragic, that this level of fear and anxiety about speaking is being turned up. It used to be, let's say, a level 4 or 5 out of 10, Jamal, as journalists in the region. Now I would say it's a 9 out of 10. People are really worried about their lives.
You're listening to the voice of my co-host, Dr. Jess Ghannam, who just returned from Qatar. He was giving us an update on the situation there and on basically the sensitivity of the situation because of this whole thing with Yemen and Saudi Arabia.
I would want to say just one more thing, if I may, because we're on this question of the Crown Prince and what's happening with the Crown Prince and all of this. I do want to say that it was interesting that this week, Jamal, and I'm going to say this in the context of knowing that one of my predictions for 2018 is probably not going to come true. I'll get to that in a second.
Well, we still have a couple of weeks.
But Jared Kushner, who must be feeling incredibly nervous and anxious right now because of what happened to Michael Cohen, what happened to Paul Manafort, what happened to Michael Flynn, what happened to all these people who have been indicted and some of whom have been convicted and pled guilty to. Jared Kushner is on Fox Hannity show and is throwing love and support for Mohammed bin Salman and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And it was just so unbelievably disgusting. I mean, I don't have any other word for it, that you have Jared Kushner, who's the son-in-law of the president, coming out and giving advice, political advice, about, how we need to cultivate and support, what's happening in Saudi Arabia right now. They're an important ally. They're all this crazy stuff that he's advocating at a time when the entire world, Jamal, has come down negatively on the Crown Prince.
Except for the United States and
Russia.
And Israel.
Yeah.
I'm going to add to your prediction, but add to your analysis, Jess. If you look at the connection, of course, Jared Kushner, everyone knows that. He's the son-in-law of our president, Donald Trump. But also, he is, and this is not himself personally, but the entire Kushner family, they have a strong relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Oh, yeah, that's an understatement.
In fact, Bibi Netanyahu, when he used to come to the New York tri-state area, he used to stay at the Kushner's estate in New Jersey and sleep in Jared Kushner's bed. I'm not making this up. This is where he used to stay before he became prime minister.
That's very disturbing.
So
but I know.
So the connection, when you talk about MBS, and this is very important, MBS has two strong defenders. One is Benjamin Netanyahu, and then the other one is Donald Trump. And the connecting point between the two is Jared Kushner.
That's right.
So Jared Kushner plays an important role in this whole cover-up. And I call it a cover-up because
it is a cover-up.
We know that the CIA has all the evidence pointing towards MBS. The Turkish government shared it with the CIA basically director when she went there. And they are doing everything possible because they have been, and I say they, again, this is the quadro connection. Netanyahu, MBS, Kushner,
and
Trump. They have been creating this new peace deal for the Middle East.
Right.
And I'm not talking only about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
No, the whole thing.
Even though this is what they've been talking about, the deal of the century. The deal of the century is the reorganization of the power structure for the entire region, stretching from the Mediterranean all the way to Iran and maybe even beyond. So even Iran and Turkey are part of this deal.
That's right.
They have concocted a deal, I'm telling you, and the master mind behind this deal is Benjamin Netanyahu, channeling it through Kushner to work it, within the U.S. And of course, they know that the wealthiest country in the Middle East, and of course, strategically and politically and so forth, influential is Saudi Arabia. And all of a sudden, this whole affair with the murder of Khashoggi kind of threw this monkey wrench in their way, and they're trying to kind of untangle it. I don't think they'll succeed, but that's why you're seeing all these jockeying. And perhaps, for the very first time, even though it's very Hippocratic, very hypocritical by Congress. They're kind of smelling the kind of the they're kind of uncovering what's going on.
Jamal, I think you're exactly right. This is an attempt. This is not just about Palestine. This is about reshaping, reconfiguring, realigning, whatever word you want to use, dramatically restructuring the entire region from Turkey all the way to Oman, and beyond, and absolutely. And the idea is, and our listeners need to know this, that to frame it as an Israeli-Palestinian peace plan is a complete joke, because there are much broader, extensive, wide-ranging consequences. In fact, I'll go as far to say, Jamal, that this grand peace plan that's going to be unveiled in January has nothing to do with the Palestinians.
It has nothing to do.
And the Palestinians, in fact, have had zero input into this peace process that is going to be unveiled as a grand plan. I would not even be surprised that there are no Palestinians from the PA. I mean, they may be able to drag some Palestinians from the diaspora, from somewhere, to stand, as some sort of, stand-in, as a cutout, if you will, for the Palestinians. But our listeners need to know the Palestinians and the rest of the Arab world is not on board with this dramatic configuration. I'll tell you who is. Saudi Arabia is, UAE is, and to talk about a thugs club, Egypt is. So you have President Sisi, you have MBZ in the United Arab Emirates, and then you have MBS, in Saudi Arabia, Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. Now, if you put your full faith in this thugs club to bring peace to the Middle East, I don't know if you've drank the Kool-Aid, you're smoking something else, but this is not a peace plan. Don't believe the hype. This actually could have rather significantly dramatic negative consequences for the region for generations to come.
You've been listening to the voice of Dr. Jess Ghannam, who has just returned from Qatar with the most recent updates. This is Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. We are going to shift to discussing.
But I do want to say one more thing, Jamal.
Well, you said the one. No.
Let me say a second last thing.
After your one thing,
okay,
we will be talking about the news.
Sure, but
that we've been monitoring.
Sure, but this is Palestine. A segue. This is a segue to the news.
Okay, go ahead. Okay,
the segue to the news in Palestine, which is related, because what's happening in Palestine right now, there's an inflammation of things happening in Palestine right now, and I think it has to do with this so-called peace plan. But I just want to say that one of my predictions that I made at the beginning of the year had to do with Jared Kushner. I believed that in 2018 he would be indicted by the special prosecutor or by the Southern District of New York. I am unhappy to say that I'm not optimistic that my prediction for 2018 will come true. Having said that, I'm absolutely confident that in 2019 we will see a time when Jared Kushner and the Kushner companies and Donald Trump and his children and the Trump Corporation and and Trump Enterprises are going to be entering a phase where most likely many of these individuals are going to get indicted for some significant illegality.
I don't think you're off the mark. I think as we've been talking about it from day one, and we've seen maybe some of the actions have been delayed. Just yesterday, we've been talking about Trump's lawyer, Cohen.
Yeah.
He'll start he just commenced actually serving his 3-year
No,
sentence.
he doesn't start till March.
Oh, till March.
Yeah, he'll be serving in March.
And he needs to pay $1 million+.
Right. Michael Flynn is going to be charged this week. Paul Manafort is going to be, there's going to be a whole court hearing this week on Paul Manafort lying yet again to the special prosecutor. We have Weisselberg, which is somebody we haven't talked about a lot, Jamal, but Weisselberg is the chief financial officer for Trump's corporations.
And we'll get to that.
He knows where the economic bodies are buried. If I were Jared Kushner or the Trump children, I think I would feel, as we say in Arabic, Jamal, I would feel very nervous.
I'm sure they are nervous.
Yeah, because these illegalities, these thuggish behaviors, these criminal-like activities, I think the chickens are going to come home to roost on all of them.
And they will. It looks like all roads lead to this. It's amazing that we actually have still an administration with so many indictments, with so many people leaving. If you remember Trump, when he came into power, he was saying that he was going to hire the best people. Remember that?
Yeah, only the best, Jamal.
Only the best.
Only the best people are going to get hired here.
Yeah,
only
and
the best.
So those who have not been indicted and they have been fleeing, they've been quitting.
I know.
And those who he did not fire. So if you count the number of those who have been indicted, the number of people who will be indicted sooner or later, those who left basically because they kind of realize, and then, just like our former Secretary of State Tillerson.
Yes, Rex,
and then he gets attacked by his boss as, what did he call him, dumb as a stone or something like this?
Yeah.
I mean,
we'll use another word, yeah.
Which is totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
And now you have basically, like you said, the month, I think, of January, maybe February, we're going to see more indictments, and the noose is tightening on this whole cabal. The level of corruption is just beyond belief.
Yeah, that's true, Jamal. And I think that one of the things that's happening, and we are just surmising this from our understanding, and this will lead to our discussion of what's happening in Palestine. Palestinians are not going to accept more subjugation under the guise of a peace plan. They're not going to accept more occupation under the guise of a peace plan. Unfortunately, Palestinians had to learn the hard way from the Oslo Agreement over 20 years ago that the so-called Oslo Plan turned out to be another opportunity for the Israelis to steal Palestinian lands and to occupy Palestinian land. Now we have this pressure of the unveiling of the Jared Kushner plan, the Trump-Kushner plan.
I should have asked you earlier if the so-called deal of the century was a subject of discussion when you were in Qatar.
It was a subject of discussion.
And what did the folks there think about it?
I think people had the same ideas we talked about. Nobody believes it. I mean, the Qataris have been trying to do what they can to support the rebuilding of what's been happening in Gaza. That becomes very complicated, needless to say. But the Qataris basically don't believe anything that MBS is doing or promoting, or that Donald Trump is promoting.
I mean, they feel threatened, but I do think they have to walk a
very fine line.
Fine line, because they are also dependent on the United States, or on the strategic alliance with the United States. The United States, as you've mentioned, has one of the largest.
No, the largest.
The largest air bases
in the region.
In the region,
by far.
And they have strategic alliance. With the United States.
No, but that puts more pressure on the United States, Jamal.
So how will the question is, how will the United States react should Saudi Arabia decide to interfere or invade Qatar, considering both Saudi Arabia and Qatar are allies of the United States?
It's a great question, Jamal. I think that's probably one of the best questions, and you're exactly right. Qatar is dancing on a head of a pin, as they say, trying to walk a fine line. But I would put it back and I would say, who needs more than the other, right? Because the Qataris do need the United States, absolutely, unequivocally, for intelligence, for military, economic issues, for all sorts of things.
I think even our strategic alliance with them requires us to defend Qatar should Qatar gets invaded.
Well, that's where it gets complicated because, the United States can't just pick up and leave Qatar because the amount of military presence in Qatar with over 10,000 U.S. military personnel and hundreds of cargo planes and hundreds of jets and, thousands of people of infrastructure running this huge military base. The United States can't get out of that, nor would they have any other place to go right away.
Yet Trump's sweetheart is MBS.
So, having all that in mind,
where do we stand?
Where we stand is that, as I said before, the region and especially the Qataris, because President Trump is so unpredictable and MBS is so unpredictable, they don't know what to do. They're trying to walk that line and be as strategic as possible. But you know what, Jamal? Knowing what President Trump has done in the past and how mercurial he can be, how unpredictable he can be, the Qataris are nervous, but I would tell you even the allies of the United States in the region, maybe not so much MBS, are nervous. Let me throw out something else. If Trump is only going to be around for 2 years, let's say, because the likelihood of him being impeached I don't think is very great. It may or may not happen, but most likely he's going to be around for 2 years. And then after that, most likely there's going to be an administration that is going to have a very different foreign policy. Does it make sense for the Saudis to hitch their wagon with Trump right now? Do you think that's such a great strategic, plan for them?
Well, my only answer, as long as MBS is in charge, they will.
Yeah.
Because of the action of Saudi Arabia and due to Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia now has become very toxic in the region. Meaning, Saudi Arabia does not have any friends except those, when I call them fake friends, who are financially dependent on it.
That's
right.
So
when you talk about Sisi in Egypt and say, oh yeah, he's standing by Mohammed bin Salman, he's only doing it because
he needs the money.
He needs the money. Including, when we talk about the Palestinian Authority, and that's why there is that split. Qatar supports Hamas in Gaza. Saudi Arabia supports Fatah in
the West Bank.
And without that funding, the authority will collapse because now they don't have any money from the United States.
Right.
And the only kind of sources of money they're getting are from the EU and Saudi Arabia and then some other countries. So they buy their loyalty. Basically, the loyalty in the Middle East will shift like the shifting sand. And it's all tied to the money, the petrodollars that Saudi Arabia is willing to spend. And when this change, if for whatever reason, believe me, all the allies will be jumping ship so quickly.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Jamal, because I will tell you finally the fourth thing that I did hear about. And it's you're not, and again, this is something you're not going to hear about anywhere in the political analysis here, is that there was kind of a whispering going on that there are groups in Saudi Arabia among the other princes, they're not crown princes, but the princes among the 200 that MBS imprisoned for that period of time and took $100 billion from, that there is talk about maybe there's a coup coming in Saudi Arabia.
And it happened before within the family.
Yeah. So, but the fact that campaign, that discussion, that idea of a possible coup d'etat against the crown prince is being heard in various places in the Gulf, to me, is kind of interesting. I don't know if you've been hearing that.
Absolutely. And that's why Mohammed bin Salman, by the way, I mean, the Khashoggi thing, of course, it shined the spotlight on how ruthless he is and how his intelligence services function. But this was basically his strength. His strength was to eliminate all the opposition.
That's right.
He gathered all his cousins. He didn't care. These are his blood relatives, imprisoned them, squeezed them for money.
$100 billion.
took their passports, so many of them can't leave the country, so they cannot mount a revolution against him from outside, say, if they went to Europe or whatever. And the very few who are actually living outside, they cannot walk in now. Now they saw what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. They're not going to walk into any Saudi embassy or consulate very soon to renew their passports.
No.
They can't actually travel.
Yeah, they're stuck.
So this was part of him basically consolidating his power. So I don't know. It's going to be very difficult unless it happened from within and from those who kind of managed to rally some support within Saudi Arabia. I don't see this will work unless there was an assassination attempt, and Saudi Arabia has a history with this, because if you recall, King Faisal was killed by his nephew.
That's right.
So yes, I agree with all. These are not rumors. These are things that may happen if they've managed to kind of outsmart Mohammed bin Salman's intelligence apparatus, which many will argue
is not that good anyway.
No, which was I actually argue that on that level, it's aided by the Mossad and the CIA.
Absolutely.
So that's another discussion. But
we should talk about Palestine.
We have to talk about Palestine because events on the ground are deteriorating.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Jamal. Can you give our listeners kind of the latest update about what's happening in Palestine right now?
I mean, it's very important, and I'll go with the latest, because the latest today, for the past few days, Israeli soldiers have been invading deep into the Palestinian Authority's heart, which is like Ramallah and other places. In fact, the Israeli military was 500 feet away from Al-Muqata'a, which is the presidential headquarters. This is where Mahmoud Abbas's office, and sometimes he even stays there and sleeps there. It was a few feet away from the finance ministry, right in the heart of Ramallah.
Unbelievable.
And they have conducted search operations. They have assassinated, according to them, two members of Fatah and one, I think, from one member of Fatah, one from Hamas, who were supposedly or allegedly implicated in attacks on Israelis. And then, as of today, there was a response from the Palestinians there, where they've attacked Israeli soldiers, and so there was a shooting near on a bus stop where Israeli soldiers gather on Route 60. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed and one was injured, and which made Netanyahu kind of came out and said, okay, we have to build more settlements. So this is his answer.
So his response is to build more settlements.
His response is to build more settlements.
Even though the settlements are the cause or the root cause of all of the disruption and all the attacks that go on there.
That's right. And so the situation is, I think, in my opinion, number one, people who are familiar with our show and our discussions, and when I talk about the West Bank, we talk about Area A and B and C and whatever. All the attacks have been concentrated in Area C. Area C is the largest chunk of land that's supposed to belong
to the Palestinians.
To the Palestinians, part of the state. The Palestinian Authority is basically relegated to the big towns like Ramallah, Bethlehem, and so forth. And that's outside Area C, right? Jerusalem is E1. We're not even talking about the Jerusalem area. So Area C, this is where we currently have the highest concentration of settlements.
That's right.
And Israel should have handed Area C to the Palestinians more than 10 years ago. And Benjamin Netanyahu, instead of handing it back,
built more settlements.
He was building more settlements. So even the attacks before, also 2 days ago, there was an attack on some settlers. And so all these attacks have been happening in a territory that belongs to the Palestinians, that was occupied in 1967, that during the Oslo accords, it was part of the agreement was supposed to be returned to the Palestinians. And yet Israel calls these, like if you look at the Israeli media today, and it's amazing. I read from my Twitter feed some of the reports. You know, you have Haaretz, which is a very progressive Israeli media. You have the Jerusalem Post, which basically is the Likud voice in Israel. The headline in the Jerusalem Post:
What's the
today's
headline?
terror victims, and they talk about the terror victims. This is the headline. They don't talk about that they
Wait a
are
minute.
soldiers.
The terror victims?
Yes.
They're soldiers.
They talk the same thing. Haaretz reports the news, says attack on Israelis, and they don't mention that those Israelis happen to be
Occupying soldiers.
Part of the occupation army on occupied land, and nothing about the Geneva Convention, nothing about the rules of engagement.
Nothing about international law.
Nothing about international law. So they're trying to spin the news that these attacks are just kind of happening in a vacuum, and all of a sudden Palestinians are going berserk, attacking Israeli civilians. These are soldiers. Imagine. So even within the news, if you watch Fox News, even CNN, they refer to these attacks as terror attacks. They don't talk about that this is occupied territory. They don't talk about the violation in transferring. Even if you think about the civilians, which are the Israeli settlers, those are people who were illegally transferred into an occupied territory, which is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. So I would pay close attention to the news, because I think Israel now is making a move. Not Israel, maybe I should say Benjamin Netanyahu is making a move to claim Area C. So they've been playing footsie for the past 10 years, delaying and building, making facts on the ground. Now he has his 800 settlers and he wants more living there. The next action that's going to happen from the side of Israel, from Benjamin Netanyahu, we're going to wake up to the news when Israel will annex, just like it annexed Jerusalem, that they will annex Area C, and then all hell will break loose, in my opinion.
I think that's right, Jamal.
I mean, this guy, instead of de-escalating, he's just escalating the situation. He's pushing Palestinians backs against the walls, appropriating more land, bringing more settlers, putting more soldiers on the ground. And if you are, if you're a smart person, you're just going to look at this and you're going to say to yourself, you know what? What's going to happen?
No, I think that's exactly.
You're going to have for every action there is a reaction. And this time it's going to be a very violent reaction, in my opinion.
I think you're exactly right, Jamal. And I think, again, putting this in the larger context, when is Benjamin Netanyahu going to have greater cover than right now? He has the cover of the President of the United States. He has the cover of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He has the cover of the President of Egypt. He actually has the implicit support from the King of Jordan. He's not getting anything from Lebanon. Syria is in disrepair. You could argue that from the point of view of Benjamin Netanyahu, when am I ever going to have this chance again to appropriate, steal more land and get away with it than right now at this historical moment?
You're absolutely right. We're going to keep our eye on this situation. I think it's going to be escalating unless we have interference from the outside, and I don't think the United States is going to be, and with Trump now under all his issue and him pledging total allegiance to Benjamin Netanyahu, no one is going to stop him. And this guy, he just sees an opening and he's going to take it.
That's right.
And just drive the area to more blood
and destabilization.
Destabilizations. So thanks.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Arab Talk. Be sure to visit our website, arabtalkradio.com, where you can both hear and watch the show. We live stream the show on Facebook at Jamal Dejani 2, Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific time, and you can listen live at on the show, of course, on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco.
Also YouTube Live.
And make sure, you don't miss an episode. Subscribe to our podcast through Apple or Google's podcast app. You can find all this information
on our website.
On our website, ArabTalkRadio.com. Talk to you next week.